What's up, everybody? Tom Pelissero here with Judd Zulgad on Friday. A very loose atmosphere around the Vikings, Judd, I think, to say the least. They warmed up to Gangnam Style today.
Heard.
Slightly disturbing how many guys not only know the horse dance, but could do it in the middle of practice. You saw a bunch of that in the locker room, though, too. It's an upbeat, lively environment, which isn't entirely surprising when you won a couple of games and you got some confidence. Right. But I thought it was interesting what Kevin Williams said to me on my show last night when I asked him, how do you guys now avoid having a letdown in this next game against Tennessee coming off these two big wins? He said, don't drink the Kool-Aid. All of a sudden, you're going to have more questions. You're going to have more media talking to you, asking about it. We haven't accomplished anything yet. The veterans have to continue to deliver that message because it sure seems that over the past couple of weeks here, those guys have been talking to the young guys and made sure that they get where this team is right now.
And that starts with the head coach, right? That starts with Les Frazier telling them. And that's the thing about football. Football, at its best, is just full of cliches, which is one game at a time. Don't get ahead of yourself. Don't start to believe the press clippings because, you know what? Guys like me said this team would win 4 games. If they win Sunday, they will have won 4 games already. They'll be 4-1. The funniest thing about this game and this week to me involving the Vikings is people are talking about this as a trap game. If I had told you in late July that the Minnesota Vikings at any point this season, forget about this game, at any point we're going to have a trap game that would involve them being trapped. I mean, yeah, I could have believed they'd be involved in a trap game that they were the spoiler, but the Titans are, 1-3. The Vikings are 3-1. The fact that we're even discussing the Vikings being involved in a trap game situation speaks volumes to how much things have changed around Winter Park this season.
Well, let's also not forget, you can look at how the schedule sets up here, and these 4 games they have in a 19-day span, I think it is, 3 of them at home, and they all look like games that the Vikings should have a pretty decent chance to win. Even Arizona, I think, got exposed, especially offensively last night. Yeah. They can't do anything to move the football despite some of the weapons that they have on the perimeter. Right. You got a Tennessee team coming in this week that's going to be starting their backup quarterback in Matt Hasselbeck. You go to Washington, and they've done some positive things, but that is a game that maybe you should have a chance to win, as well as Tampa Bay. So you can look at all that, but let's also look at how the end of the schedule sets up. They know they've got to go and get as many wins as possible right now because all of a sudden those last 6 games of the season, you got the Bears twice, you got the Packers twice, you got Houston, and you got a St. Louis team that's played pretty decently too. That's the end of your season right there. Right. You've got to get a bunch of wins in tow here because as much as you don't want to look at it and say, well, the best we could do is split those games, realistically, it's going to be tough to go on a big run late in the season.
And let's slow down for a second here, too, and realize that if these guys start to believe their press clippings at any point in time, they're not good enough.
Why are you blaming us? Let them blame us. I don't want to hear from you that we're the reason that they're going to have a false sense of who they are.
Forget the end of the season, Tom. Think about right now. If they start to believe that they are good, they are going to be in big trouble. They're better than we expected. But there are still, every game you watch, there are a ton of things that have gone right. There are a ton of things that could go wrong. And you know what? They have avoided, as we talked about a couple days on our video, injuries so far. If you start to have a rash of injuries, things could go wrong. This Vikings team is very much, and I hate to be the pessimist here, but they're very much on a teeter-totter. I mean, things could go wrong quickly. That's why they've got to take it. That's why they cannot look ahead. You can't look and say, you got Tampa Bay coming up, you got Arizona coming up. You got to focus on the Titans, no matter what the Titans are like. Matt Hasselbeck coming in here, 37 years old on Sunday. Would you rather have Jake Locker starting or Matt Hasselbeck?
Well, Hasselbeck's a different quarterback at this point. He gets the ball out quickly, doesn't take a whole lot of sacks. He's a veteran guy who's played in the league. With Locker, he's probably going to be more mobile. He's going to extend more plays, put more pressure on your defense. I think that they're different sorts of quarterbacks, but I think Locker probably at this stage is a better quarterback, at least marginally.
That's what I've been saying, and people disagree with me. People think it's going to be a problem that Matt Hasselbeck is starting against the Vikings. I don't think that's going to be a huge problem. He had a terrible training camp. And you know what? At some point in time, at 37, Brett Favre, this didn't happen to, but some guys lose their fastball. Chris Johnson is the other dynamic that I'm really curious to see what Chris Johnson looks like. He came back against Houston last week, had a pretty good game, but he was brutal to start this season. I really thought this was a guy who held out last year, paid the price for that, and would come back and have a really good season. It sounds like he got a lot of his yards against Houston, though, late in that game, when Houston basically didn't care. Really curious to see what Chris Johnson can do because, 3 years ago, we're talking about, is it Adrian Peterson or Chris Johnson? And now,
you realize that was still Adrian Peterson's entire media session yesterday, was talking about the comparison with Chris Johnson. One guy is much better than the other at this point.
It's not even close. And the guy who's better is coming off knee surgery.
The only reason it's interesting is they're still the 2 highest paid running backs in NFL history.
So what happened to Chris Johnson? What's your theory?
It's a good question. He sat out last. He's a finesse back. I remember asking 2 years ago when there actually was a lot of debate about which one of these guys, and I could care less about the debate, but I had to ask. So I asked a scout for another team. I said, if you had to take one of these guys If you had to build your team, run first offense around one of these guys, who would you pick? And he said that Chris Johnson's got that unique ability to get around the corner. He's really got that juice, and he can break the big one. Okay. But the difference with Adrian Peterson is he can go inside and outside. Right. You're not going to run Chris Johnson a whole bunch between the tackles. All of a sudden, I think that with that sort of a back, he's not going to get the unblocked yardage that Adrian Peterson does. He's not going to break tackles at the same rate. So all of a sudden, I think when the offensive line took a step back, and when he hadn't been in training camp, you started to see some of the holes emerge in Chris Johnson's game, which is if he doesn't have a hole to shoot through, he might shoot through the hole faster than anybody in the NFL. But if he can't get to the hole, or if there is no hole, there's nothing he can do.
And Peterson can do that.
Right.
And Peterson last week, very interesting to me that he ran between the tackles on almost every play. That, to me, that's a good sign.
Well, it's a reality of the fact that they don't look at him right now and say that he really can get to the edge because he still doesn't have that little bit of extra burst left. But boy, when he was in traffic in that game, I thought it was very impressive what he did. The number of tackles he broke, that backed up situation where he broke the 2 tackles, spun out of 1, and got him out from the 5-yard line to the 20-yard line or whatever it was. Runs like that's Adrian Peterson.
That's vintage Peterson, and I don't think, as impressive as the Jacksonville game was, because that was the first game back, the Jacksonville game to me, you saw him building up from that game, but you were still seeing him sort of look a little hesitant for him. Last week against Detroit, I thought was the first time that we've seen him look like the Peterson before he got hurt, and still, this recovery is incredible. I mean, to me, you cannot underplay this story, that a guy coming back off an ACL injury this quickly is this good again.
You mentioned the Jacksonville game, and I thought that was the other thing that Kevin Williams said that was interesting on my show was everybody else has looked at this and said, boy, if you go to Indianapolis, you get a stop there, you go to overtime, maybe kick a field goal, you're sitting there at 4-0. Right. And Kevin said, we could have been 0-2.
Yep.
We weren't good in those first 2 games. If the offense doesn't come up with that miracle drive, we're in deep trouble at that point. And that's part of the reason you had the veterans who decided this was the time to step forward and say something to the team. But they continue to look at it as you've played 2 games that were not very good, and you've played 2 really good games so far. They've still got to define exactly what this team is. Certainly a lot of encouraging signs, a lot of young players stepping up to the table here, but it's a week in and week out thing. There's 12 games left, and what happens to young players? Toward the end of the season, usually they're not used to playing that many games, and you're going to run into some trouble. That's when they're going to have some of their hardest games of the season. Again, they've got to take advantage of the way the schedule sets up, some of the games they've got, of playing at home, all this stuff. This is big leading up to the midway point of the season.
Whoa. You're talking like this might be a playoff team.
You're
talking about the end of the season.
No, I'm not saying that they're a playoff team. I'm unconvinced to that. Okay. I predicted them to win 6 games. I thought it would be in a 5 to 8 game window that they could win. If a lot of things went right, they could get to 8. I said 6 and 10 before the season. Yep. They're halfway to that win total at this point. There's a lot of season left, but here's the thing, Jed. They're going to be relevant. No matter what happens here, unless you lose 4 in a row now and be 3-5 in mid-season, you are going to be relevant, and all of a sudden those games are actually going to mean something in November and December for the first time in several years.
And how great is this? It's fantastic.
It's more interesting to cover.
We both sat through the 2010 season, which was miserable at 6-10.
We didn't sit. We traveled. We flew to Detroit. Yeah. We sat in Philadelphia for a few days.
All you need to know about the Vikings in 2010 was you had 2 trips to Detroit, Michigan. So all you need to know about them. You're right.
And the last time that the Vikings were favored by 6 or more points in a game, December 5th, 2010 against Buffalo. It's been a long time since they've had this sort of a spread in Vegas.
And do you remember who was on kickoff returns that day for at least one?
Joe Webb?
Correct.
And they had
Use Joe Webb.
Tavares Jackson relieved Brett Favre and threw like 3 touchdowns, and Sidney Rice had a huge day. It's a lot different team. A lot of things have changed.
That was Sidney Rice's only good game of that season.
You're correct. I think it was his 2nd or 3rd game back.
You are idiots. Why did you pay that guy? I told you not to.
$18.5 million guaranteed. He's Judd. I'm Tom. Full Vikings coverage at 1500ESPN.com. We'll see you.